on top of being stressed and on top of being worried about all these what ifs, I started picking fights with those that were closest to me. And I started losing trust extremely easily. And I started getting very paranoid. I started getting like all these mood changes and started getting like happy when things were good, but then extremely sad and fatigued when things weren't even bad. They were just less than good.
Hey guys, welcome back to Normalize the Conversation. Today I'm here with Kayla, who has an incredible story to share. I am so excited. Thank you so much for joining me.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Of course. So do you want to share your story with us?
Yeah, I'm Kayla. I am 24 years old, and I wasn't really introduced to the world of mental health until I was forced into it pretty much. No one ever talked about it. As a lot of people know, growing up, you don't really hear anything about it. You don't hear about depression. You don't hear about anxiety. You kind of only hear about like the extreme cases, really. And so it was pretty rare. And so when it happened to me, I was completely confused. It started when I was a freshman in college. At the time, I was away from home. I was in a very toxic relationship. It was my first relationship. And the relations between me and my mom weren't the greatest. And so you add that on top of the freshman stress of, being in college, like being on your own for the first time and everything else, it was not a good mix. And on top of that, I had just started birth control, and it was the Depo shot. And for those of you that don't know, it's a shot that gives you, injects you with tons of hormones all at once. That's supposed to last you 3 months. And then you get another one every 3 months. So just keep all that in mind. So things started getting really, really bad. I started getting a lot of arguments with my boyfriend, a lot of arguments with my mom. I was super stressed from school and getting those good grades. I was also pretty lonely, and I had all these hormones in me. And turns out that the doctors who gave me the shot double dosed me and gave me another shot too early. And so I was just like a wreck, and I didn't even realize it. And so I started getting more and more stressed, and I started realizing hey, this isn't normal. I'm not, on top of being stressed and on top of being worried about all these what ifs, I started picking fights with those that were closest to me. And I started losing trust extremely easily. And I started getting very paranoid. I started getting like all these mood changes and started getting happy when things were good, but then extremely sad and fatigued when things weren't even bad. They were just less than good. And so I eventually went to a doctor as a follow-up for the birth control, and I started talking about my symptoms emotionally. And they were like, it sounds like you have depression and you have anxiety. And I was just quiet, and I was like, what does that mean? What, that, I mean, is that not normal? Is that not what everyone else kind of goes through? It just seems like I'm stressed. And then they're like, no, it's excessive. Here, talk to a psychologist and blah, blah. So fast track, I got diagnosed at the time with moderate to severe depressive disorder and with general anxiety disorder. And once I got that, immediately they put me on Xanax, and they put me on, I want to say Prozac or some antidepressant. And they just told me, here, some pills, it'll make you all better. Here's some pills you take every day. Xanax, take whenever you're having a panic attack, and everything's going to be fine. So me not knowing anything and them being doctors, I said, okay, let's do it. Didn't work out very well, actually, because I'd never talked to anyone about this. I wasn't going to a therapist. I was just depending solely on these pills, expecting myself to just be back to normal. And then fast track to the end of my freshman year. It was the night before my finals, my finals. And I was on the phone with my mom and my boyfriend, and things just got extremely heated. I don't even remember what it was about, But long story short, it was very heated argument and I started having a panic attack. And this was the worst one I had ever had. Before this, I only had like one or two. And so, in my heightened state, I took antidepressants and then I took a Xanax. Nothing was happening. I waited 15 minutes, 20 minutes, nothing was happening. I still felt like I was going to die. My heart was beating out of my chest. I thought like the world was just going to like collapse on top of me. And so in that state, I took another pill and then I took another pill. And I do not remember really anything after that other than waking up in handcuffs, passing out again, and then waking up in an ambulance, passing out again, and then waking up in a psych ward. And so I stayed there for a week and I realized that I didn't remember a lot of it, but never once did I try to commit suicide. Never once did I want to die. I was just in that state. I thought these pills were the only things that were going to take me out of this feeling. And since it's not working, I'm just going to take some more. Like that's how I actually thought they worked. And when I was in the hold, I realized that the doctor who gave them to me completely skipped everything over what you're supposed to tell a patient. Like with Xanax, you're not supposed to take it when you are having a panic attack. You're supposed to take it beforehand, or else it's not going to work. It's actually just going to sedate you, but it's not going to help with the panic attack itself. And the antidepressants have no immediate effect on your mood at that moment. It's more of just like a regulatory basis kind of thing. And that was the first time someone was like, hey, you should talk to someone. And like, hey, you should identify what caused this. And from that moment on, I had my eyes open to, the bad parts in a sense that I wasn't taken care of. And the people that I trusted to help me through this didn't tell me anything that I needed. And since no one else talked about it before I got diagnosed, I didn't have anyone to talk about it because they didn't know anything. So I was just completely lost. And I was just, like I said, I was kind of forced into this world in a sense that I had to search for answers and I had to do, this work. I had to look for help. I had to ask those questions. I had to have those conversations. And eventually it led to a passion for it, because I realized through all of that everyone goes through something at some point. Everyone either can say for themselves, yes, I have mental health issues, or I know someone who does. I mean, 1 in 5 people like in the world, like have it, like it's 20%. That's millions and millions of people. And yet it's still a topic that no one talks about. Someone who has depression can interact with 20 other people in one day that also have it, but then they don't have that support. They don't have that information. They don't have that help. And me having gone through that is what motivated me to have those conversations so I can help at least one person not go through the same thing. And so that's where we are today. I studied psychology. I got my bachelor's in it. I'm not a psychologist, but I do care about the topic a lot, to the point where I want to spread as much information that I can and have as many of those conversations that I can. So
I love your strength and your passion to help create these conversations in a way that no one else is. Like you said, you grow up and no one talks about mental health. No one introduces you to depression or anxiety or ADHD or OCD or autism or anything. And then all of a sudden, a doctor might tell you you're living with something, but you don't know what that means. Mm-hmm. How do you advocate for yourself at a doctor, at a psychiatrist, at a therapist's office if you don't understand what it means? If you have no backstory to it, no understanding, no way to know what it is or what causes it or what treatment options are. And then you have to research it on your own. And there's such a stigma on it that a lot of information out there is false or given in a way that makes you feel worse about yourself so that you don't want to continue the conversation or reach out for help and support. And it's so frustrating. And that's why people like you who are so willing to have these conversations and to take your pain and turn it into purpose is so, so important. So thank you for what you're doing.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And one thing I do want to tie on to that is I do want to preface all of this with the fact that even though me or Francesca or any other person you see talking about it and being completely open, that doesn't speak for every single person who goes through it. Just because we're talking about it and we are trying to put that out doesn't mean that everyone who has a mental illness will be willing to talk about it or will be equally as open, because maybe, everyone goes through something different. And so maybe don't assume that someone's just going to be like, okay, here's all my secrets, here's what I'm going through, and here, like, I want you to understand. Like, you have to understand that everyone is an individual, and what I'm doing, what Francesca is doing, is just trying to shine light on the general population. But we can't speak for any one person, any one illness, any one disorder. So we're just trying to make it more normal. So in the future, people who are dealing with the same thing will hopefully add their voice to this movement.
Exactly. And when it comes to mental health disorders, there is no standard symptom list. There is no standard one treatment fits all. Everyone's different. So just because you don't relate to one of our treatment plans or our symptoms doesn't mean that what you're going through is not valid or not real. And I think that's something that a lot of people feel, is that because someone lives with anxiety and they have panic attacks that are debilitating, and if I don't, well, then maybe my anxiety is not that bad and I don't deserve to go and get it checked out and see if there's something that could help me, whether it's medication or coping mechanisms or therapy. I think a lot of people are afraid because they don't fit that stereotype that society has created.
Yep. And that's definitely like a point that I wanted to go over, is like the misdiagnoses and or just categorizing or putting people into a box. Now, we don't understand everything about the brain. We don't understand everything about anything, really. And so what the best that we have is what we have now, which is the DSM-5, which is people who have been studying the history of this, like, what works, what doesn't. And then there are people now that are being more innovative, like Dr. Amen, that we'll talk about. So what you're talking about, how there are people that may have the same diagnosis, but they don't share the same symptoms at all. They can have completely different symptoms, but still have the same thing. So like depressive disorder, my depression looks completely different from like my friend's depression. And it's the only way for you to understand is to be open and say, okay, this is what mine looks like. And then at least that'll give that person an idea, like, okay, so mine's different, theirs different, but we still are kind of in the same boat. We're still going through something. And so like with the DSM-5, it leads to a lot of misdiagnoses too, because there are like trillions and billions and, words that I don't even know, the amount of combinations that the symptoms can have from the DSM-5 can, like, someone could have the same exact symptoms as you, but have a completely different diagnosis. And it's so hard. I think we need to give props to the people that are working in this field, because they have to try to maneuver that, and they have to try to figure out, okay, well, this person's doing this person's doing that, but then this person's also doing this. And it's so many different things. And so the plus side is that we do have a map. We do have the DSM-5 to be able to guide us in a direction that we're supposed to go when it comes to treatments. But the downside is that it's so easy to get it wrong. And it's so easy to put someone into a box on this side when they're supposed to be all the way over here. So what does that mean? If they get a treatment for this box, then that could totally make their symptoms worse when they actually need a treatment that's completely different. And that just is a snowball effect to a whole bunch of other things. They can be misinformed. They can have all these misconceptions. They can, if they get worse symptoms from their medication, it leads to a whole emotional effect on their self-identity. Like, this treatment's not working. Does that mean I'm not fixable? This treatment, it's not helping me. Does that mean that I'm screwed and I have to live with this for the rest of my life? And eventually, like, they'll get discouraged. They'll be like, okay, well, nothing's going to work. So I just, like, it's sad. It's sad that a system that's supposed to help us has the same power to prevent us from actually getting help.
Exactly. I couldn't have said it better myself. And they put you in a box based off of your symptoms. And it's not any psychologist or therapist or social worker's fault. It's what you're taught, it's what you're trained. And like, I was what they considered a textbook case for depression. I had suicide attempts. I felt hopeless. I was down. I spent a lot of time crying, wanting to give up. And I was feeling lonely, sad, depressed, the whole textbook case. But no one looked at how happy I could go. I could be super up. I was on top of the world, loved life, talking 1,000 miles a minute, changing topics so fast. No one saw the mania because they were so focused on the depression. I was misdiagnosed for 2 years with depression, anxiety, when I actually had bipolar disorder as well as anxiety. I got put on the wrong medication, put me into a manic episode. I was like, I'm done with medication, never doing medication again. It's not the right thing for me, doesn't work. Yeah. I was totally one of those people for 2 years until I finally got the right diagnosis and the right medication. And I think a lot of people go through that, where we're misdiagnosed because they put you in a box as soon as they hear a certain set of symptoms, and they don't look at it from a whole.
It's like that confirmation bias where they already see you as something. They already have an image in their mind. And then naturally, they just pick the things that support that. But you can be completely ignoring the one thing that'll completely change it. And again, like you said, it's not any one psychologist or psychiatrist's fault. It's the paradigm. It's the foundation that we've been given to build off of. And that's kind of goes into why we're having this conversation and why you have this nonprofit. It's because everyone knows now that there's something wrong. There's multiple things wrong. But that's the only way to change it, is to address it and to talk about, okay, what is your experience and how do you feel like you've been failed by the system, let's call it, or society. And, then we go from there.
Exactly. And last time we spoke, you recommended me to read The End of Mental Illness. And that was so eye-opening.
Yes.
It was, I can't even put it into words, because in the book, Dr. Amen says, no one looks at the brain. When you have something wrong with your heart, the cardiologist checks your heart. When you have something wrong with your foot, the podiatrist will look at your foot. No one looks at the brain.
And it's crazy because, like you said, it's like common sense, but we can't blame anyone for not really like looking at it, because you and we studied it. We studied psychology, but never once, I don't know about you, but never once in my 4 years of studying it was I ever told, hey, since mental illness makes sense to look at the brain, because your mind is inside your brain, so why not look at it? And a lot of the times when I saw doctors actually looking at the brain, it wasn't until after they got an unrelated head injury. And then, they have all these other symptoms and all these other problems. But just like for context, I guess, for the people listening, Dr. Amen is a psychiatrist, but he actually prefers the term clinical neuroscientist. And I think that's a perfect description, because what he does is, instead of relying on the DSM-5, he still uses it, of course, but instead of relying solely on those categories and on those boxes that we were talking about, he actually looks into the brain, just like you were talking about, how, okay, something's going on, the perception is wrong, or, their navigation of the world, or their conversations, or their language, something is wrong. And we need to look at the source of that, which is the brain. So he does things called Spec Scans, and it's like an MRI, but instead of looking at the anatomical structure of the brain, it maps out the activity and the function of the brain. So it gives you an image, And a healthy brain is a smooth brain and shows everything is functioning at 100% and everything's great. But if someone goes in, say, with an alcoholic or a drug abuser or someone who had a traumatic brain injury, and some part of their brain isn't working as well as the rest of them, you will see that there is a deficit inside that image, not because their brain is literally carved out, but because that brain, it's as if it didn't exist because it wasn't working properly. And so going into the book, it's all about him changing that old paradigm that we were talking about and him saying something needs to change and we need to do our parts by getting as much information as possible to help people the way they're supposed to be helped and help them to the point where they won't have to keep coming back for treatments and they won't have to keep taking medications. Instead of shooting in the dark and saying, oh, this medication doesn't work, all right, we're going to go with this one. But instead being able to pinpoint, this is what's causing it, this is the treatment, and this is specific for you, not for the category that you fall under. So yeah, I'd like to talk about that story that's inside.
Yes. I was going to ask you to share that story because it is so intriguing and it makes you look at mental health disorders in a completely different way. So please share that story.
Yes. So prefacing this, the point that this book is trying to make and we are trying to emphasize is that mental illness should be seen exactly the same as physical illness. And before I get into the story, to kind of paint the picture, I guess, if someone, for example, someone has depression, right? And they are in their bed and they have, no motivation to get up. Someone could possibly say like, hey, just think happy thoughts and get up. Like it's not hard. But say someone is in bed, they don't want to get up because they have a broken leg. You're not going to be like, hey, just think happy thoughts, just get up. Like that's ridiculous. Or someone who has social anxiety and they are so fear-stricken and they are practically paralyzed because they can't move. You're not just going to be like, hey, get over it. And like, some people can say that, hey, get over it. Like it's just people, just talk. But then say someone is actually in a wheelchair and they're actually paralyzed or they actually can't move. You're not just going to be like, hey, get over it, get up and go. Like it's ridiculous. What happens in your brain and what Dr. Amen goes over is that if something is happening in your brain, it's not your choice. It's not your mind, like, telling you like, hey, choose to act this way. Something is physiologically changing your perception. It's changing your will. It's changing, how you see things. It's changing how you want to do things. It's changing your actions. It changes your abilities to navigate life. And so going into the story, we're going to talk about Dave and Bonnie. So Dave and Bonnie were married for 15 years. Everything was perfect. Everything was great. They were a perfect match, super happy, textbook marriage, right? But then after a few years, so like the last 8 years, they've been having a lot of problems. And so nothing really changed with Bonnie, but Dave completely changed into a different person. He was mean, he was angry, he had rage fits, he was aggressive, he was upset. And so a lot of it turned into Bonnie resenting Dave. And there was so much strain on their marriage because it didn't seem like Dave even wanted to be in the marriage anyway. So instead of giving up, they were like, hey, let's go to a marriage counselor. So they went to certified therapy for 3 full years. And $25,000 later of treatment, the counselor was like, you know what? In my professional opinion, your marriage is screwed and you guys should get a divorce. And they also diagnosed Dave with, what did he get? I wrote it down here. Mixed personality disorder with narcissistic and antisocial features and intermittent explosive disorder. So not necessarily ideal personality of someone to be in a marriage. And so because he was diagnosed with that, and because of this person's knowledge that they were given from the DSM-5 and their psychological background, their opinion was, this can't be fixed. He has to work on it himself, but this marriage is not going to work out. Luckily for Dave and Bonnie, they were stubborn. They didn't want a divorce. So they were directed to Dr. Amen, the person who does the Spec Scans. And right off the bat, they had both of their brain scans. Bonnie came out normal. She came out healthy, mentally healthy, physiologically healthy. Dave, on the other hand, his brain looked exactly like someone who was an alcoholic or was a drug abuser, like to the T, textbook. And so they were like, hey, do you drink alcohol? Do you use drugs? And after verification with their lifestyle and through Bonnie, they came to the realization that he doesn't drink, he doesn't use drugs, he doesn't do any of that stuff. And so they were wondering, okay, but if he doesn't do that, how come his brain looks like this? So, and for background, people who have this brain type and this lack of activity in those certain parts of their brain, people who abuse drugs and alcoholics and stuff, they have symptoms that are exactly like the ones that Dave has. And so when we think it's not because of any, mental issue, it's because they're abusing drugs, because that's messing with the way that their brain is wired. So after realizing this, they analyzed his life for the past 8 years, and they said, what happened? Like, do you work around any fumes or toxic, air? And he said, well, I work at a furniture manufacturing plant, and I work near fumes, but I don't wear a mask, even though I should. And then they were quiet, and they're like, when did you start working at this factory? 8 years ago. So from that, immediately they were able to say, your brain is being affected by the secondhand inhalation of these toxic fumes, as if you were straight up doing drugs by yourself for the past 8 years. So you have brain damage from these fumes. And so it's not from, this personality disorder or this explosive disorder. It's because your brain has been suffering from your environment for 8 years and you didn't even realize it. So their course of treatment was, okay, we're going to get you off of your medication that's treating you for those specific disorders. We're going to give you brain nutrient supplements, so things that help your brain process, cognitively like well and at 100% and all that. And he was pretty much commanded to change his job, which I think is very justifiable. And so he went back to that job plan, but away from the fumes. Now everything's fine. He is, pretty much back to normal. I followed up, and like their marriage is great. They're still married. Like she says that she feels like she has her husband back. For the past 8 years, it was like to a stranger, but then now they're happily married. And just to think about it, going back to that marriage therapist, she didn't do anything wrong, really, in a sense that like she did her job, she listened, and she tried to figure out the best outcome. And under her professional opinion, with her limited resources, they would have been divorced by now. But because thanks to people who said, no, there has to be more, and we have to look into the organ that is causing these problems, because of that, he was able to turn his life around and make up for all those years that he lost. So
I love that story so much. And it's such a perfect example of how the DSM-5 is very limited. And that is the Bible of mental health. Mm-hmm. And when we don't look at the brain, we miss so much. There are so many other factors that can contribute to different symptoms of mental health disorders. Yes. One common thing is hormones. People don't realize that. And it's so important that we don't go straight to kind of giving up on finding answers. A lot of times we go to psychiatrists, we get medication, it doesn't work, we give up. We don't have to give up. You can get blood tests run and check your hormone levels, check your vitamin levels. Low vitamin D can cause mood instability. Go and get a brain scan if you can, if it's financially affordable. There are so many things that you can do, but no one talks about it, so people don't realize it. We go straight to medication or therapy. And although those can both be great, if it's not working for you, that doesn't mean you have to give up.
Mm-hmm. I remember when it was after I was diagnosed with depression and anxiety, and to me, it was completely out of the blue. Like it I wasn't expecting it at all. And so when I went to the doctors and I found out that I was, doubly dosed with all those hormones and stuff, it did feel extremely like vindicating and like a relief. Like, okay, from the very small amount of knowledge that I had about mental health at the time, I was like, okay, like I'm not crazy. And like, this wasn't just all made up in my head, and this was real because something happened in my body, and that changed the way I thought, that changed the way that I interact with people. And it's because of these hormones, not because, I'm some lost cause, hopeless, crazy person. And that's the stigma talking. And that stigma is written by the world that we live in right now. And as I was saying, like earlier before we started recording, like I do firmly believe that the way the world is right now and the society that we live in, people who have to deal with their mental health and deal with the obstacles that come with it, we're kind of set up for failure. And so that's why I'm so grateful for you and for everyone else who is deciding to make a change and actually do something to change the fact that we're struggling here. It's hard. And it shouldn't be like that. There's absolutely no reason. And so the stigma is what debilitates so many people from actually getting a treatment, from talking about it, from being educated, from feeling hopeless. And like you were talking about, and how like Dr. Amy was talking about, is there's so many different factors. And the idea of, us getting screwed over by society is evident in almost everything. So for example, biology, low blood pressure, stress at work, hormones, obesity, like all of these things make you so much more predisposed to having to deal with some sort of mental health issue. And where do we live? We live in a country that pushes like fast food, very unhealthy lifestyle, and like they encourage, and like healthcare, and like the amount it costs to even talk to a therapist, to even ask someone like one question. You pay like $150 just to ask, oh, what does this mean? Like, it's ridiculous. And then so we are living in such a profit driven society that profits take precedent over the actual well-being. So the profits of food take over the precedent of people's well-being physically. And their hearts, like cardiologists, they like, hey, stop eating fast food. But because we live in a world that makes it so accessible and so easy and so desirable, it's hard. And that already in itself creates an obstacle for that person that's actually trying to turn their life around, actually trying to get better. And then going into the social aspect, social media, it's great, it's amazing, it connects everyone. But in the desire to connect people with people all around the world, it also creates a huge gap. And it creates a lack of connection, really, because one, it creates a barrier between people who have something and people who don't. And so I know that I struggle with this with social media, is like, I feel like I need to be on social media because I need to be in the know. I need to have this connection with my friends. I need to show this so people know who I am, kind of thing. But with that, with being on social media, I am always on it. And I am always looking at these people, and I do everything in my power not to compare myself to them. But because of advertisements, because of, let's just talk about America's idea of beauty. Do I fit that? What do they have and I don't? Why do they seem so happy and I'm over here like, sad all the time? Or like, how come they get to do this and I don't? That creates so much animosity, so much rage, so much sadness, and it hurts us. And the scariest part is that we don't even realize it. It's called automatic negative thoughts, I think, from reading. And those are things that you have no control over, but they directly stem from what you surround yourself with. So if you are surrounded with social media, if you're surrounded with, the negative news that they choose to show on, TV all the time, if you're around people who don't care about their health, if you are in a city where all people do is not care about the environment, not care about, what they put in their bodies and things like that, without you even trying, your body is going to respond to it, and it's going to be in that fight or flight mode. It's going to try to protect you, but if you're constantly surrounded by that, if that's constantly being reinforced into your life, then it gets harder and harder and harder to dig yourself out of a hole that maybe you didn't even put yourself in.
Exactly. There are so many things I want to touch on. First, let's go back to fast food and processed food and all the chemicals that are being put into our foods that we don't realize. And it is so accessible and it's so much cheaper and it's so convenient.
It tastes good.
It tastes good. It's really good. Today, I actually just got a blood test run called the MRT panel that I should get results in a week. And that tells me what kind of chemicals, medication, food that I'm allergic to, that my body may react by giving me headaches, by giving me cramps, by making me feel bloated, by making me feel depressed and down. And I think a lot of people don't realize that there's so much in our food that can be hurting us, that can mess with our heads and our moods. And that's just not something that's talked about. If a doctor didn't recommend I get this test done, I wouldn't have even knew it was an option. And it's also something that is so infrequently done that insurance doesn't cover it. So it's an expensive blood test, but it can make all the difference in so many different ways. And that's just another disconnect of information that we don't have. And then building onto social media, all the advertisements we see. What is the most common advertisement you get? For me, it's all these like fat burners and waist trimmers and corsets and the Skims and just everything to make you look thinner and smaller.
Yeah, I see that all the time too. For me personally, a lot of what I follow is like Christian and spiritual like stuff, but then the advertisements aren't Christian at all. It's all about like, oh, like speak things into existence kind of thing. And it's like, it gives the idea of, okay, if you aren't positive all the time, then if you are ever sad, it's your fault.
Toxic positivity.
Exactly. And it's hard to ignore that because you see it like every 5 posts.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's something that people tell us all the time. Like you said before, just be happy, think positive. And that's something that I feel like I get all the time, where everyone's like, well, just think positive thoughts and you'll be fine.
I get so frustrated. I'm like, dude, if I could, don't you think I would?
Exactly. And it's like, maybe I can think these thoughts and tell myself that, but do I believe it when everything is teaching me to not believe it? Especially with social media. It's also that fear of missing out. And if I don't look good enough, I can't post this. But if I don't post, then I'm going to lose followers. People aren't going to know what I'm going to lose friendships. There's so much pressure.
Yes.
And something
it's like crazy because it's not explicit. It's like none of that pressure is told directly to you. Like, hey, meet this standard, do this, do that, buy this, talk to these people. It's not, no one tells you that. But it's the algorithm that it's created. And it's, like you said, the fear of missing out. That's where it's derived from, is like no one has to tell you to do it. It's because it's assumed. It's the norm. That's the norm that we're supposed to follow.
Exactly. And it's so kind of common in our society to start attacking people in the comments. We don't agree with something. We don't like the way someone looks. Cancel culture, we start attacking. And it's so easy to do behind a screen. And that's another thing that contributes to mental health. Being constantly bullied and being terrified to post, being terrified to not post. What are people going to say? It's overwhelming. And we have kids doing it so young. They're on social media 10 years old, 8 years old.
Yep.
They're growing up with that overwhelming fear and ideas that they don't even know are in their minds.
Oh my gosh, I can't. I mean, like, yes, I'm very upset of like whenever I see like a little like 6-year-old that's like going on Instagram and stuff, and they're seeing all these like teenagers or older adults that are, you know, maybe don't have values that align with mine. I'll just say that. It's like, it's sad because I'm like, that's being put into such an impressionable brain, such an impressionable mind. And whatever they're exposed to now, they're going to remember it and they're going to hold dear, even if they don't even try to, for the rest of their lives. And it's
Exactly.
like, no, like we're the older ones, we're the adults here, like we're supposed to set an example for these kids. And so the only way that we can do that is to acknowledge, like, hey, you shouldn't probably be doing this. Or like, hey, I probably shouldn't be on this for that long. Or like, hey, maybe I should block or maybe I should unfollow this because I know that it doesn't add anything to my life. So why would it add anything to anyone else's life? And
Exactly.
yeah.
Being accountable with our social media use. And like you said,
Mm-hmm.
6-year-olds, 8-year-olds, 10-year-olds, these are formative brain years. This is a very, very important time when your brain's developing. And when your brain's developing through this constant attachment to a screen, attachment to your follower numbers, your like numbers, your comments, what people are saying about you, how people are going to perceive you, what you have to look like, what you have to do to be accepted and be cool, it can really break you later on.
Yeah.
And it's
And like you're
terrifying.
driven by fear.
Exactly.
Like cancel culture, like we were talking about. Oh, I loathe it. I don't hate a lot of things in this world, but cancel culture is definitely up there. And it's so sad because it's an innate desire for human beings to connect with other human beings and to feel that sense of belonging. And so with cancel culture, not only are you hurting someone's feelings, not only are you attacking someone's self-identity or, self-confidence, but you're isolating them. And that, I mean, that's why like solitary confinement is such an inhumane, horrible thing to think about even like being possible. But yeah, we're not confined to four walls, and we're not like, denied human contact, but it's still horrible to do to someone, is isolating them and telling them you don't belong here. No one likes you, no one wants to be around you because of something that you think or because something that you've done. And that cancel culture creates isolation, which creates loneliness. And loneliness is probably the biggest or one of the biggest factors that lead to mental health issues, that lead to depression, that lead to anxiety, that lead to literally everything, is that sense of loneliness. And so imagine yourself being beat down so much to where you feel isolated from the rest of the world. What are the odds of you actually asking another person for help when you have been conditioned to believe that no one wants to be around you, that no one wants to talk to you? And that's
Exactly.
what people are doing, and they don't realize it because it's normal. And it's so heartbreaking, and it needs to stop.
It really is. And it also goes against the whole field of psychology as a whole, because
Yeah.
psychology teaches you that we can grow, that humans can grow, we can learn, we can adapt our behaviors. Over time, we can evolve, we can change, we can be better and do better. But cancel culture goes 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 11 years ago, you did something bad, you're now a terrible person. But maybe you were not a bad person, but you made a very bad mistake. You did something wrong 11 years ago. Maybe it was completely out of character, maybe it wasn't. But that doesn't mean that today you're that bad person or that in that bad place or making those same mistakes. You could have grown. And we try to attack people and put them into this hole where it's like, that's who you are, you're stuck there forever. You're allowed to make mistakes. Some people make mistakes that are a lot more severe than others, and that's a whole other topic that I won't get into. But we can't just keep attacking people and telling them that they're worthless, that that they're canceled. You're not a TV show. You're not a TV show. You can't cancel a human being. It just, but
Yeah.
it's so frustrating. You can't just disappear. And people
Mhm.
are telling you to disappear, to go away, that you're done, that you're worthless, that you're terrible. And like you said, when you feel so isolated, who are you going to reach out to for help? Because you feel so alone. And who's going to believe you? Who's going to understand you? Who's going to care for you? Who's going to nurture you? Who's going to
Mhm.
be there for you?
It's deep. a heavy topic. And like, so like going into like the whole stigma thing, and maybe you aren't telling someone like, hey, I hate you because you have depression, or like, hey, I don't want to be around you because you have OCD. Like, maybe you're not saying that to someone, maybe you're not hearing that specifically, but if someone makes a joke when you open up, or when I'm completely honest and I'm saying, like today, I don't know why, but my anxiety is through the roof and I can't do anything, or like, hey, I have to cancel plans because I don't have the will to even get out of bed. Like, if I were to say that and then someone comes around and they don't attack me directly, but they play it off as something that's not a big deal, or like, oh, like if you had like, migraines or like hardcore stomach ache, that would make sense. But if you're just feeling upset, then why don't you just come over here? It's not a big deal. Like, that's a lousy excuse.
Yeah.
Like, that's not, telling me that I don't mean anything, but like specifically by your words, but that message is making me feel the same way as
It's
if you would
validating.
have told me. Exactly. And it makes me seem like I am less of a person, or you will take me less seriously, or I'm weak, or I'm making it all in my head, or I'm selfish. Ooh, I hate when people are like, oh, you're selfish because you talk about this, or you're selfish because like you're trying to get attention. Like, no, like no one wants to go through this. This is not happy. This is not like, I don't want to like be be paralyzed by fear after just having a panic. I don't want to have a panic attack, or like I don't want to stay in bed all day and like think like the world's most depressing thoughts. I don't want to think about blackness. I don't want to think about death. I don't want to, not be able to drive my car safely because I don't know if I'm having a heart attack or not. Like, that's not pleasant. No one wants to do that. So how can you tell me that I'm being selfish, or that I'm doing this on my own personal vendetta? Like, that doesn't make sense. And then so that only creates more and more and more of a distance between me and that person, or me and that group that's saying that, or me and that society that is telling me what I should feel, even though they have no idea. And so what they do, and what's happening now with BLM, with anti-Asian hate, with the Israel Palestinian conflict and stuff, so many people are getting their information from other people who are getting information from other people who are getting information from an extremely inaccurate, one-sided source. And that's not how it's supposed to be. That stigma is only going to be addressed and changed and talked about if we realize that there is a stigma. If you have ever made a joke or a comment about depression, but you weren't even talking to anyone specifically, you just said, oh, I'm feeling depressed today. Like, you're probably not feeling depressed. You're probably just sad or upset about something. Like, something as simple as that adds to the stigma that is already so big. So joking about OCD and saying, oh, like, their OCD is crazy, like, give them some time. Like, no, that's something that is causing them stress, and that is lowering the quality of their life. No one wants to have any of these things, but people portraying that this is a choice, people portraying that this is something not to take seriously, people invalidating, what we go through or how we feel or how hard it is to change anything, that just makes that climb that we have to make so much longer.
Exactly.
And yeah, and it's just, everyone has a part to play in everything, whether that is just sitting down and listening, whether that is watching, a video or reading an article, whether that is calling someone specifically and asking them like, hey, if you're comfortable, I want to learn more about what you deal with, so I'm more educated. Something that everyone can do is available. And I guarantee you, if one person does that, then that creates a ripple effect. But same goes the other way. If one person makes a crude joke, or if one person feeds into the stigma, that creates a ripple effect the opposite direction.
Exactly. And the media plays such a big role in that. I was watching a TV show that I love dearly. But there's so many times when a character goes and sticks their head in the oven and says, I want to kill myself because of a small thing that happens. Or they talk about therapy and they're like, for the psychologically deranged. And although it's for comedic effect and it might make you laugh for a second, it's like, oh my goodness, you just contributed to the whole idea that you have to be deranged to go to therapy. And that's why a lot of people don't want to go to therapy. Or when somebody says they're suicidal, they're just seeking attention and it's a joke, it's not serious. The media plays such a big role. Talking about eating disorders, how many shows have you seen where characters make jokes about, oh, I can't eat that, or do I look like I eat, or like I can only sniff it and throw it away? Like there's so much being fed into our minds that we don't realize that are contributing to the stigma. And it's very, very frustrating because it's all coming at us without any realization. It's all unconscious.
Yeah, and that creates an image of us, of the population with mental health problems. It creates an image that they expect us to fit into, and
Exactly.
no, that's not how it works. Like
Exactly.
panic attacks, they're not all crazy. They're, like they're not all intense. They're not all debilitating. I could be having a panic attack right now and you wouldn't even realize it, but that's how it works. And like how you were talking about like bipolar and stuff, everyone assumes that people with bipolar disorder act one way all the time, that you're either here or you're there and there's no in between. But that's not the same for everyone. Or like they're always really, really happy or they're always really, really sad. But, sometimes they can just be happy, like overly happy all the time and vice versa. And like people don't know that.
Exactly.
And like I'm still learning and I've been exposed to this world so much more than the average population. And there's still so many things that I still have to learn. So there's not, there's I'm like trying, oh my gosh, I'm getting like, when I get like really excited and stuff, I just kind of go off and then it drops. Like there's not just one thing that everyone has to know. There's not just like one source or like one illness, one way to act. Like it's not black and white. You can start anywhere. You can talk to anyone. You can, whatever you're interested in, whatever you're exposed to, whatever jokes that you don't find funny, but you don't know why they're not funny. Or, if someone, reacts negatively to a joke. Okay, I want to know, did I hurt someone's feeling? Because I don't want to do that again. It should be a normal human being characteristic to care about other people, and to have empathy. Now, empathy ranges a lot between human beings, but everyone has it to a certain extent. That's why we get sad when other people are sad. That's why we celebrate when other people are happy. And so if you get some sort of feeling, or if you think like, oh, even for a split second, like you laugh at something, but there is a part of you now that knows that something's wrong. Now it might not be huge, but thank goodness for the people who are having these conversations and for the past decade have been doing everything they can to at least put it out into the world. Now we have a little place in people's minds, whether they're aware of it or not, that there's a tiny little spark in them that's going to tell them like, hey, maybe I should look into that, or like, hey, something's off. At least some sort of recognition that change needs to be made at really any level.
Exactly. And it's a conversation that will never end. You can never know enough. It's something that we will continue to learn and research, and things will change. The DSM has had 5 versions because they're constantly learning and developing. And that's okay. And it's okay to get it wrong a million times as long as you continue trying to join in conversations. You don't have to speak, you can just listen. Educate yourself, learn. Don't just stay where you are. Because I think that's where society is where we just kind of want to stay where we are. And it's so important to continue these conversations. And Kayla, thank you so, so much for joining me. You are absolutely incredible.
Thank you for having me. It was a lot of fun. Love having these conversations.